Welcome to another broadcast from mindyourhealthcast.com. As you will recall, if you watched the previous broadcast, we introduced a subject called Your Organs, Renew or Replace. And it all has to do with the concept of rebuilding your organs. Or do you want to get a replacement? Now, as I've mentioned, there's a lot of pitfalls in getting a transplant, and it's not my place to argue whether one should or should not get transplants, although there's a lot of problems with the transplant. And I mentioned some of those in the last broadcast, so I'll not go through repeating it again. However, on your own, if you really want to look into it, there's ample material on the internet about transplants, about the expected lifespan of those people who get transplants, and hopefully some of the difficulties that people experience when they get a transplant. And of course, as you know, with a transplant, it's a one-way street. Once you've made the plunge, there you are. And there's no going back, at least at this point. Now, we're going to take all this a step further. We did mention that medicine, traditional medical research, has gotten into some areas relating to regeneration of tissue and organs. And unfortunately, you don't hear much about it. One big thing being even though it could be made highly profitable by the medical establishment, especially if somehow they can patent some ideas and then cash in on that with some patents. Otherwise, it's going to be much less income producing than organ transplants. So there's not as much money being put into it, and as I say, you don't hear a lot about it as far as out in the public news. Mostly the advertising and news stories are involved around breakthroughs in new drugs, and of course in a high percentage of the cases, every new drug brings on a whole new set of complications. Again, I guess I will remind you that modern pharmacology is involved in management of symptoms. Not cure, but managing symptoms. And there's so many things involved that we just can't bring it into one broadcast. But the way I do the broadcasts, I do try to do a lot of tie-in so that you see how it all relates to the bigger picture, which is very difficult. I'm giving you in condensed version, which many times represents hours, tens of hours, and in some cases even hundreds of hours, and a long time of absorbing and integrating information to bring you these pieces of information that I do, and somehow each one is like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle. If you have this huge puzzle which represents the healthy person, I'm presenting the picture, but the picture is kind of chopped up into little pieces like a jigsaw puzzle, and so bit by bit I'm giving you more pieces to fit in so that at some point you get the big aha, I see the big picture. I see what this is all coming to. When you're looking at a bunch of black stuff or a bunch of gray stuff or green yellow, green red, green orange mixed, all these different puzzle pieces only can represent one little aspect of the big picture. And as I say, the big picture is the healthy human, and all these other factors are factors involved in presenting what a healthy human is, how we can develop and maintain that state. Now, it's not easy in today's world, as you should know if you don't. There are so many intrusions, whether they be chemical of various sorts that are toxic, or whether they be electromagnetic fields which are disruptive and disturbing. or whether they be your own body in terms of stress inducing a lot of problems, or whether it be malnutrition. I dare say that probably malnutrition is a basic. If you don't have the right things in your body cannot do what it's supposed to do. And consequently, big problem. And so, when you put all these little pieces together and you can bring them into the whole, it makes sense. I mean, it all comes together and makes sense. It took me a long time, and I know that just hearing pieces is not going to do a tremendous amount in some cases if you don't pursue more on your own, or you don't go back and look at close to 200 broadcasts I've done. I've made a lot of videos, and all of them cover certain aspects, but it's just hard sometimes, and there's some basic things, and maybe one of these days soon I'll go back and do a recap of the major sections of the puzzle that you need to kind of put together to see this big picture. So organ regeneration or tissue regeneration, as I say, it's not been ignored by medicine, and there's some good researchers out there in the field of research, and as much as they have funds available, they are researching pure research, not trying to prove a product that can be sold at a very high price and you can scare a lot of people into taking to manage some kind of symptom, which in the long run is trying to turn off the immune system in almost every case, because inflammation is a tremendous amount of the problems that people go to doctors for are symptoms of the body attempting to deal with some type of disturbance, whether it be toxic material or what, or malnutrition, and I'd say probably that's at the core of a high percentage of our problems. And I think a lot of people who get into research honestly begin to see what the requirements are. Now, we talked about some of the things that have been done by medicine, but I will mention there is some material coming out, and for example, I've noticed that there's a brand new 2014 book called Tissue and Organ Regeneration, Advances in Micro and Nanotechnology. Another one called Tissue and Organ Regeneration in Adults, Extension of the Paradigm to Several Organs. And another one called Organ Regeneration, Methods and Protocols, Methods in Molecular Biology. So people who are doing work in those areas, research-wise, are doing some very good research. They've learned a lot about how the body works and how it repairs itself and maintains itself. And with that information, someday, and I say that someday down the road, the way it appears, and you'll find out when I talk to you about some of this stuff in a minute, is the problem that usually what gets out into medical practice runs a minimum of 20 years behind what is known research-wise. Now, it depends on the nature of what the type of therapy is, because in some cases, it's going to interfere with other very profitable portions of medicine, and so there's no big rush or interest in hurrying to get it out. But inevitably, it has to come to this, because we cannot continue. It's not like in a transplant that it costs for that first year, but probably between $500,000 to $1 million by the time you've gone through the first year of a transplant, and that it costs you $5,000 at current pricing, $5,000 a month to keep that organ in. Say nothing of complications that come along the way that require treatment or hospitalization because of having no immune system. And or sometimes, in spite of all of the medications that are given to suppress the immune system, it will try to activate and try to reject this foreign tissue that's been put in the body. So in my mind, whether stem cell or whether organ replacement, if it's not from the person themselves with their own genetic, there's going to be trouble with the immune system. It's just inevitable that's going to happen. And so some of the good research is involving taking the stem cells and or mesenchymal cells, as we mentioned before last time, that have the capability of differentiating into all the different organs or tissues that are needed in the body. And so those are the ones that are needed when there is a gross assault on an organ, meaning it's been severely damaged either by trauma or by a severe poisoning of some sort. And so poisoning, of course, involves chemicals that are used in food preparation and in cleaning and decorating, like solvents and so forth, and paints and whatever. It involves also pesticides, which are extremely toxic to the human system. And it involves viruses, which are really cellular toxins. And we've talked about that before, and we'll probably talk some more about it again. And toxic metals. Those are some of the things that are really problematic in terms of creating problems. So, there's, as I say, there's two approaches to stem cells. One is activating your body's own stem cell, which is going to produce something that has the right genetic. Now, if you take a stem cell from another person, even though it has not differentiated into a tissue or an organ, it still has a different genetic library. Therefore, it's not totally compatible with the person that you're trying to put it into. Now, there are probably, well, it's beyond what we want to talk about today. Some research I've kind of hinted to before, but it's pretty wild, and it involves a knowledge of a lot of things before it begins to make any sense, so we won't even touch on that today. But I wanted to comment on the fact that some of the things that are being done, and especially I wanted to comment on something that's been done in the natural field that started a long time ago, but pretty much was ignored by mainstream because it seemed too simple, and because, number two, it did not involve the taking of drugs that were patentable and hence could be huge amounts of money charged for. So they've done some work about taking cells out of your own body and doing things to them to cause them to grow and produce more cells, and then reinstalling them back into a damaged area in an organ or tissue. And so they've found, for example, if they take out certain neurological tissue and expose it to what is called a cyclotron at certain frequencies, that they could stimulate nerve growth factor. That's one of the things that they have found out. They also found out that they could take from bone or heart and do the same thing using a different resonant frequency. Now, I've mentioned before that every tissue, organ, cell in the body has its own resonant frequency. Because every atom and molecule is in motion, being in motion, they generate a certain frequency. That frequency is resonant to that particular tissue, and hence producing an outside magnetic field or electromagnetic field of those frequencies can have a tendency to trigger, as they have found out, the activation of cell growth. There are certain growth factors that are made by the human body and animal bodies, and that if you can trigger those, you can get things to happen. So anyhow, it is an approach that's better if you use your own tissue, because now you avoid having a foreign genetic complex put into your body, which your body at some point is going to try to get rid of. You know, the body has its own protective mechanism that when you put something into the body, especially if it's close but not close enough, The body has to sort that and decide, is that friend or enemy? And if it's enemy, then it's going to initiate an immune response against it. It's going to produce antibodies. And hence, whatever it was that got into you is an antigen, and the response is an antibody response. And that's how the body protects itself. So if you get something poison in the body's immune system has to kick into gear to try to recognize, do I have that code already? If I don't, then how fast can I build that code that will then deactivate that poison? And in most cases, they're either protein or protein-bound toxins. For example, a chemical could get bound to a protein in the body and hence create a deviant protein, basically. And so then the body recognizes that that doesn't belong there, and it initiates a response to get rid of it. And those symptoms of that response are what we feel when we think we're sick, and also then taking a drug that will turn off those symptoms then makes us feel better. But unfortunately, does not stop the damaging process that's going on because of what's in your body happens to be poisonous. That's why the body initiated the immune response in the first place. So a tremendous amount has to do with the body immune system and how it responds to things that get into your body that should not be there. Now it's interesting because I ran across an article called Regenerative Biology and Tissue Engineering from the Institute of Genomic Biology. Okay, now this is fairly recent material, and here's what they said, and this kind of is the introduction to all the stuff we're talking about. Organ malformation, damage, and failure are the most common causes of human morbidity and mortality. Okay, so that's one of the big problems of getting sick and dying is those type of things happening. Now, getting poisons will cause damage and sometimes failure. For example, if you happen to eat a poisoned mushroom that destroys your liver, you're in big trouble. Even if you can stop it, you did some damage, but as you probably heard by now, and we've talked about a bit, the one organ in the body that has the tendency to be able to regenerate is the liver automatically. But I also read to you some material, or introduced you to some, that says that now they find that every organ and tissue basically has the capability, but does not seem to be called into play automatically. And so that's something we're going to be talking about in a moment, how you can do that. But at any rate, it is estimated yearly that more than 35,000 infants will be born with organ malformations. A lot of that having to do with what the mother did when she was carrying the child. It could be genetic from history of the family, but it could also be what the mother did. Did she take drugs? Did she drink lots of alcohol? Did she smoke huge amounts of cigarettes or some other recreational substance? And hence, that could interrupt the natural progression as the fetus forms and lead to malformations. So anyhow, it says 35,000 infants will be born. And 100,000 people will have their limbs amputated. 5,000 people waiting for organs will die without receiving a transplant. And 1 million people will die from organ disease. The goal of the regenerative biology and tissue engineering theme is to develop the knowledge base and technologies that are needed to replace or regenerate human tissues and organs and thereby solve these severe health issues and contribute to improving the quality, life quality, and welfare. Okay, so based on that, there's been a lot of research. And of course, the one that's come to the foreground has been stem cell research, but it's trying to take foreign stem cells to your body and somehow get those to work in your body without being rejected, and see if they can help to rebuild something or to repair it. Some of the things that they've already discovered is, for example, directed differentiation of human pluripotent stem cells into intestinal tissue. So they've been able to grow new intestinal tissue using what are called pluripotent stem cells, which means stem cells that are capable of being simulated to become all kinds of other cells. And I just mentioned that the normal stem cells that we come in with, and also some of the mesenchymal cells, have the capability of differentiating into all kinds of cells. Now, they have already found, as I say, that the liver has the capability of regenerating on its own. This is an article from Mayo Clinic, and it talks about liver regeneration and some of the things that are being done. And as I say, you know, when I talk negative about aspects of modern medicine, as I've said before, I don't believe all doctors are bad. I'm sure, like in any profession, whether it be the natural health profession or whether it be regular medicine, there are going to be unscrupulous people, unfortunately. And that's true in any field. And so those people, really, profit is the name of the game, and what it takes to make the profit sometimes, in my mind, are very unconscionable. But if you are attempting to help people, and then it's only a matter, if you find out what you're not doing now is not working, you start looking for other avenues. That's what a good doctor will do. You can't help when you grow up. Society looks at medicine a certain way. You go to medicine, the schools of medicine, and you learn what they can teach you, and then you come out, and many times they've oversold what it can do, and you come out thinking you're going to cure the world. And I've read that from doctors, that they came out figuring, wait, just let me at them, I can take care of everything, we've got all the tools. And then when they get out and people come in and they work with them, and instead of recovering, they don't make it or they become disabled, that's when the disillusionment sets in. And so then, now the dilemma is in the doctor's lap. What way are you going to go? Are you going to continue to do this anyhow? Maybe you don't find out how good it is, or not how good it's not, until you've been in the field a long time, you've developed a very lucrative lifestyle and income, and all of a sudden one day it hits you, I'm not getting anybody well. I'm making people feel a little better, but in the long run, it's very frustrating to sit here and write prescriptions all day and see the same people back in another week, 10 days, 2 weeks, or a month, or whatever, because they still have problems, and even the suppressive drug wasn't able to get rid of the misery or discomfort, or they come back with something more serious, which means in the process of having suppressed the body trying to correct the original problem, it has now become more involved, deeper into the system, and a more serious issue. And ultimately, you get into tissue or organ degeneration, and at some point, organ death. Or malfunction to the point that it cannot serve your body anymore, then you're in big trouble. And so, just giving you some of the stuff, again, coming out of regular medicine, there's a marked contrast between, and this I'm saying because of what I told you before about foreign stem cells being put into someone's body. There's a marked contrast between genotypes of cells in our body and their phenotypes, which says almost all cells in our body have an identical genotype, which means that they all have the same genetic library. Yet the phenotypes of cells in our body are highly variable. That means what becomes a liver cell or a kidney cell or whatever. So those are issues or problems. The only way to reconcile these two apparently contradictory facts is to assume the genotype contains more general information. Well, that's pretty self-evident. The particular cell has somehow, because of the coding information, differentiated, and but still is drawing certain types of information from that library. But it does it because it's compatible. But when you put a cell in that has a different library, the books needed for you, for your particular code and cells, may not work at all. In fact, it may provoke a big problem. So now they're saying, this is another article, stem cell study raises hopes that organs could be regenerated inside patients' own bodies. Now, we didn't get into it in big detail, but the two general approaches right now, as I mentioned earlier with the cyclotron and frequencies, is to take some tissue out of that person's body and encourage it to regenerate or grow, and when you have enough of it, then put it back in. Of course, sometimes it's going to require surgery or some other types of things to carry that out, which then now gets it into a complex, expensive process again. So anyhow, now researchers have successfully reprogrammed adult cells in a living animal for the first time, creating stem cells that have the ability to grow into any tissue found in the body. Until now, these stem cells have only ever been created in Petri dishes. In other words, they were growing them dishes, but they weren't growing in the body. And so researchers at the Spanish National Cancer Research Center in Madrid, Spain, were able to create these cells in the bodies of living mice. In other words, instead of taking cells out and trying to make them grow and then replanting them back in, now they're working on ways to stimulate the organ itself or the tissue to grow while still inside the person. They found that they could reprogram adult cells from the kidney, stomach, intestine, and pancreas using a cocktail of reprogramming factors. It raises the hope that damaged organs could be repaired by patients by reprogramming some of their own adult cells and then encouraging them to generate new tissue. He said the main purpose of our work is that it is possible to generate pluripotent stem cells directly in the tissue of living organisms. Now, I said earlier, there's some studies that show that all the organs have those capabilities already in the tissue, but for whatever reason, and they don't know the answer, I don't know the answer on that, they don't get activated like the liver does. And so, consequently, the ideal is to stimulate the body organ itself or the body tissue itself to activate its own stem cells and to repair itself or regenerate itself. Now, I did mention that they had found that the heart, the human heart, actually regenerates about 1% of the cells annually on its own. And why? Well, because I think the liver is so important to all the processes going on in the body that it has retained an active regenerative capabilities. The heart, to a limited degree, even though it is also very critical, in fact everything's critical in the body, but some more critical than others, because you could cut out certain things and the person could stay alive and they'll partially function. But some things, you turn off the heart, things don't keep going for very long. And so the body has activated a limited amount of regeneration of the heart because those cells can be damaged or wear out. In other words, if you got a dose of some type of cellular poison of any significant amount, you could damage several cells in the heart, as well as other organs. And so in order to keep that heart beating, the heart does have that 1% capability. So if it can do that, then it can do more. And so now that leads us to the big thing that I wanted to talk about today, and we'll talk about, I just didn't want to. And that is, I'm going to introduce you to somebody who I consider to be one of the 20th century geniuses. There's always, in every century, a few geniuses that are so far ahead of what's happening that in many times they're looked at with askance because they seem so far out that what they're proposing just couldn't possibly work because everybody knows you can't do that. And so Dr. Royal Lee is the person I'm talking about, born way back in the late 1800s, almost at the turn of the century into the 20th century. And this man was way ahead of his time. Now, interestingly, from the time he was a young man, even in school, he started taking notes and prepared workbooks about all the different glands of the body and what was known at the time that they were capable of doing. So I thought that was kind of fascinating. You don't find too many people to do that in school today. They probably don't take much notes on anything. So in any case, he was one of these restless minds that was looking at things and saying, why can't that work better, or isn't there a better way to do it? And so he ended up going to dental school, and he frustrated some of the professors at the dental school. He did extremely well. He gave a graduation address that kind of ruffled the feathers of a lot of the dentists because of some of the things that he brought up and proposed they thought was preposterous. And as an aftermath of that, he sat down with them and showed them that the basis of the things he said were really already in their dental medical textbooks, but they never brought it together. And so that shows you what a synthesizer he was. And to me, you know, a lot of people see pieces of information and a lot of people recognize things, but being able to bring it together and out of that produce something worthwhile is a different ballgame. And that's where Dr. Royal Lee was. And he actually died in 1967, but during those years, from the late 1800s to 1967, he did some tremendous things. One right off, he realized that going to dental school, that the drills they were using would get bogged down in somebody's teeth trying to drill out a cavity and would give the person a lot of discomfort and pain. And so he improved the motor that ran the drill so that it stayed at constant speed and hence was much less disturbing to the patient. That was one of his first big things. But he got into other things. He made some improvements for the military. He developed a bullet that was fired by hydrogen instead of by regular powder, which is an explosion. And even though it worked very well, the military opted to go with the continued explosive charge that they were using to fire their projectiles or missiles called bullets. He actually had a tremendous amount of patents. In fact, he had filed over 70 patents with the U.S. Patent Office. Now, he also improved some factors related to the Norden bomb sight in World War II, which gave us a special bomb sight that was much more accurate. He developed a device to record the heart, muscle, and valves long before the electrocardiograph. His was called the phonocardiograph or the endocardiograph, and he was able to measure each of the valves of the heart separately and the muscle of the heart, and he was able to determine when other organ systems of the body were disturbing valvular and heart function. And hardly anybody, even today, is aware of the fact that a problem with liver gallbladder can, in fact, affect the function of a heart valve and the kidney and the lungs and the gastrointestinal tract. And so he had developed the endocardiograph in order to detect that. And he also found that if you put in the mouth of a person something that could be corrective of that, and it did, it would actually change the reading on the endocardiograph. So again, he was way ahead. He got finally into the field of nutrition and health. And he was one of the first people to say that cavities are not caused by what's going on in your mouth, they're caused by your nutrition, which was later verified by another dentist by the name of Dr. Page, who traveled the world and studied people all over the world, and he came back and wrote this book on human nutrition and physical degeneration, and verified the things that Dr. Royal Lee had already come up with related to nutrition and health. He just did so many things, but the nice thing he did is that once he got into the nutritional field, he realized, like so many people that started finding out at the turn of the century of the 1800s into the early 1900s, that malnutrition was becoming a major health problem, and that a high percentage of the degeneration and symptoms that people were experiencing were malnutrition or deficiencies of various types of nutrients, in particular the minerals. Now, I think we always talk a lot about vitamins, and sometimes we say vitamins and minerals, but it's really the minerals that are the major players, and those are the things that get depleted in the soil, and those are the things that are missing in the food that we eat. And without those minerals, which actually are the jump starters or cofactors in the body to all kinds of enzyme functions and other types of body processes in the chemistry of the body, without those minerals, things don't happen. You can't build certain tissues. You can't break down things like in digestion to be used if you don't have the cofactors, and the cofactors are minerals. And so he realized that was a problem, but as I say, it was really way back at the turn of the century that some of the more astute doctors were realizing that they didn't need drugs, they needed nutrition for their patients, and when they provided that by correcting soil and correcting food quality, guess what? The problems disappeared, and the ones who were pretty healthy already continued to get even healthier by eating what I call nutrient-rich food. And of course, those nutrients, the key players again, are the minerals. So he realized all that. He set up, he bought some property, because by now he had become independently wealthy from the inventions that he had created and patented. So he could take his time to research into nutrition. He bought property up in Milwaukee or Wisconsin area, and organically grew products and made the first food supplements to be put out on the market. Because he realized by then that probably things weren't going to change, and people were getting sick, and the only way to get them well is that you were going to have to supplement. Because if it's not in the food, where's your body going to get it? So it got him interested in making supplements, and the supplements he made came from growing organic foods and converting those foods into supplements, so that they were, and he did it at low heat. Therefore, he developed cold processes, and therefore he reserved the nutritional value of the product and got tremendous results with it. Some doctors in the more natural health food, or health industry, made their reputation because they utilized the information that he had developed and the products he had developed. Now, I've heard the critics, that everybody always has their critics. Most people have never heard today of Dr. Royal Lee, but those that have, and the things that he produced, criticized him as just doing it to make a lot of money. Well, the companies he set up to do the research and to make the products, his written agreement with the company in terms of his part was he received $1 per year, and that's all he ever got from that. In the meantime, because once he started doing this, the pharmaceutical and food processing companies became very upset, because if you got people well and you got them eating natural and correcting their bodies, they didn't hanker too much to some of that stuff, and so it wasn't good for business. So they fought him and used the FDA, now we've talked about that before, to keep out competition, and so Dr. Lee was constantly harassed by the FDA. They threatened him, they fined him, they took him to court. He paid all of his own expenses, and paid out huge amounts of money to defend our right to be able to take supplements. Now you have that today because he paid the price, because he was the first company to make those supplements. And so, again, as I say, most people have no idea of what work he did or anything about him. And as I say, I've read some critics who say, oh, he just did that to make a lot of money, but he didn't. He used his ingenuity to invent things that brought him in his income that also benefited people. And as a result, this was his contribution to mankind. And as I've read the critics of him making all this money, but very few knew that his actual written agreement and fact was he received $1 per year. So as we look into some of the things he did, the one in particular that I'm interested in is he wondered about degeneration of organs, and he started studying the immune system tremendously. Everyone knew by that time, the early 1900s, that we had an immune system. They may have not known all the details, but they knew that we had one. Well, anyhow, he really got into an in-depth study. And see, one of his companies he set up was an engineering company. And so with that, he did all of this. And later he formed a foundation for nutritional research, and he funded his own research to learn all this information. And so he studied the immune system, and out of that he got an idea. He knew that people's systems were weakening and the body wasn't repairing them, and so we were getting more and more problems. Now, the nutritional status of the country hadn't gotten quite so bad yet. Hence, we didn't see all the organ failure that we're seeing today. Back then, we had malfunctioning organs and some minor tissue damage, but as time went on, it was getting worse. And so, as I say, look what we have evolved into today. We think we have the most advanced medical system. At the same time, when I was young, I never heard anybody talk about having an organ replaced. In fact, I don't recall hearing about somebody with kidney failure or liver failure or heart failure or whatever, lung failure, pancreas failure. All of these issues I never heard about. Nobody had it that I knew. But now here we have what's an epidemic of organ failure. Just as the earlier paper I read, how many people now, 100,000 die a year waiting for a transplant. So, it's not a minor issue. And so he recognized what was coming. I guess that's the big thing I liked about him, that he was a forward thinker. This, as I say, they made a lot of comments about him, but I know that he was so far ahead of his time that it's that's who I like to study. As I go back and look at the different, what I call geniuses that are so far ahead in their century, those are the ones that I've gone to study what they've done. Dr. Rudolf Steiner from Austria, and anthroposophical medicine, and Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, and homeopathic medicine, and Dr. Thompson and Thompsonian medicine, which was basically herbal medicine. All of these doctors and researchers were so far ahead, and it's those people that have the real information that is really beneficial. But guess what? In so many cases, it didn't become the prevailing system because it never had the monetary appeal. Because those doctors, they weren't doing it for money, they were doing it as their contribution to mankind, and their mental capabilities were channeled into doing things that were helpful. Well, at any rate, getting back to Dr. Lee, having studied about him, I'd known about him, but as I got into it more in depth, how much of a genius he was and how far ahead he was. Well, anyhow, in seeing that people's organs were weakening. Now, we weren't into the transplant yet. He noticed they were weakening, and he said, well, what can we do to help the body to trigger the natural repair response? And out of his studies, a subject developed, him and another gentleman by the name of Hansen, Victor Hansen. The two of them ended up doing all these studies and putting out a book called Protomorphology, The Principles of Cell Autoregulation. I said Victor Hansen, it's William Hansen, I'm sorry. There is another Hansen named Victor. William Hansen and Royal Lee got together with the research they were doing, and they came up with a concept called protomorphology. And if you can get a copy of the old book, of course, it's I don't know that they've reprinted it. There are people that go back now and find old valuable books that have been out of print and work to get them reprinted again and make them available. And some of them that can't happen, people have had copies, and they've put those copies in libraries at different areas that you can sometimes, especially if the copyright has run out, you can actually make photocopies of them, the whole book. And I know his is available as a photocopy, but I'm not sure if you can actually find. You may find an old used volume, and that's what it's called, Protomorphology. Now, if we break that down, proto means the form of, or the preform. It's like the blueprint of something, and morphology has to do with form or shape. And so that's what he called this concept that he came up with. Now, some other people, we're not going to have time to get into their stuff, but there's some other people who have, using the same principle in more modern research times, one actually was from the University of Florida, demonstrated that certain things could be done to regenerate in the person or in the animal, as the case might be. And so we're going to look a little bit about the protomorphology. And what happened was that Dr. Royal Lee began to, once he studied the immune system, he said there's two immune responses. There's one to outside factors from the body, and there's another part of the immune system has to do with degenerative tissue in an organ or cell in the body. And that's called an autoimmune response. And so he was, I think, probably one of the first, if not the first, to actually utilize that term, autoimmune. And so he said, what's happening is these cells are degenerating in an organ or tissue, they're being damaged, and that which is being released because of this damage is causing an immune response to try to clean the stuff up. And in the process of the body trying to do that, because see, this is new in the history of man, being exposed to all this poison and malnutrition. Two together are dynamite problems. And so he said, okay, that's what's keeping the organ from repairing itself. So what can we do to offset that? And out of that, he developed a concept that if you took the organ of a healthy animal, cow or pig, especially pigs are very close to human tissue, and we won't get into all that, but we talked about that before with organ transplants. They're very close, and depending on how they're presented, they can create some big problems. For example, you can't put a pig liver directly in a human because immediately you get what's called a humoral response, which is the first outside intrusion response, which could lead to anaphylaxis. The second one is the cellular response, which is slower, and so you can't overcome that humoral response, which is almost immediate. And so that's when I mentioned they were hoping to create a strain of pigs by genetically altering them so you don't get the humoral response, only the cellular immune response, which gives you a chance then to knock out the body's immune system before the body can reject the organ. And so that is one of the big multi-billion-dollar markets that's being worked on. Well, everybody's organs are going, we can't do anything about it, let's make organs from other animals, and since the pig is the closest, it may be the easiest to genetically somehow alter it so we can do that. And so that's why you're not getting organs directly from pigs. They have sometimes taken the connective tissue, like of a heart valve, because it's more inert, and been able to get away with that to a degree, although I don't know. I think over time you still shorten the person's life, but yeah, it gives them some time. Okay, so he wrote this material on protomorphology, and I ran across it way back in 1948 in the one of the major, the Journal of the American Medical Association. They did an article about protomorphology, the principles of cell autoregulation. Anyhow, it was interesting. People looked at it, but regular medicine rejected it. And so, here's what the translation of what this means. Protomorphogen, which is a substance utilizing the principles of protomorphology. Protomorphogen, loosely translated, means the primitive material from which an organ is created. Previously, protomorphogens were available in this country as injected therapies, but unfortunately their success did them in. That's interesting. Now, I didn't write this article, but somebody did here. Oh, I know, it's an MD who has learned that the better thing is to help people get well instead of drugging their symptoms. Okay, so he says their success did them in. So they stopped doing all that. After the drug companies and the FDA saw how well they worked, their cell was outlawed within the United States. They had 4 things going against them. They worked, they were inexpensive, they had few if any side effects, and they were not patentable. Wow. So, now some doctors have gone back and looked into it, and as I said, there's now been some modern research done, which is actually verifying what he said way back then. Now, here there's just some comments. It says, besides supporting damaged organs and tissues, glandulars can often be used to avoid the necessity of taking hormones. But he said that as more research becomes available, you're probably going to see a lot more things happen, especially since there is a branch of medicine referred to as regenerative medicine, although it's not very big and it's kind of muddled and all over the place at this point. There is some interest. But as I say, the big interest is going to be, is there somehow we can monetize this? Can we do it with surgery by growing cells out and then having to surgically implant them? Can we use some kind of chemicals that in some way may trigger regenerate? In other words, not the simple way, but some complex way that can be very expensive. If they can do that, you're probably going to hear a lot more about it. Here's what this Dr. Williams says. First, the pharmaceutical firms will want to make these prescription items. Of course, then the price goes up. And the FDA will probably go along with that suggestion. So after decades of calling glandulars useless, which is what they've done all along when they tried to discourage people from doing what I'm just talking about, they said they were useless, quack remedies, and they'll all of a sudden say, oh, guess what? We found that this stuff works. But they could be dangerous, and so therefore we have to make them prescription, and you're going to pay a pile of money to get them. That's the bottom line out of that. Now, let's take it a step further and get more into it. Now, getting back to what he said, protomorphogens, I've got so much material, I'm trying to condense it down to get the real key points because we don't have time for 3-hour presentations. And of course, most people today, if they can't hear it all in a few minutes, they're not interested. They go on to something else anyhow. All right, so what happened was that Roy Lee said, okay, we have 2 immune systems. We have the autoimmune system that is trying to take care of the poisons being produced because the cells or organs are degenerating, and therefore that's a problem. So the other immune system, normally things that have been considered food, like animal meats and so forth, that as a food, they haven't provoked all that in most cases. Now, everything has its exceptions, and we'll forget the exceptions. And in most cases, this is true. If you take a piece of steak and you eat that, it goes through the digestive process. Your body accepts that and makes use of what it can salvage out of that meat. So that's one thing. Once it goes through the digestive process, that changes things. And that's one of the things they found with insulin. In one of these researches, if they put insulin in somebody's body directly, it created a big reaction. But if it went through the process of digestion first, that it actually kept mice which have been genetically grown, in other words, it was a strain of mice that all tended to develop diabetes, that when they did this, they didn't develop diabetes. And so that was a case of doing some type of regenerative work in the pancreas so that it didn't deteriorate and to become diabetic. Okay, so here's the theory that Dr. Lee came up with. If this is the way it works, maybe that's true. I don't know. All I know is that it works. Theories, many times come after the fact. The fact is, this does okay. It does this, it does that. Now, why does it do this or that? Well, we think it might be because of this. Now, they do that with drugs all the time. If you look in the PDR, under a drug, it will say, mechanism of action unknown. Now, that's on a pile of drugs. They don't even know why it turns off a pain in many cases. They don't know why it stops a particular symptom. It turns off the symptom. That's whatever that pharmacological drug action is. They don't know. But they know that it works. So they still get it on the market and people take it. And they don't know. It says right in the PDR. They don't know. So anyhow, now somebody would say, oh, gee, we don't know how this works, if this is the way it works, so we better not take it. But for, I guess, hundreds of thousands of people have taken these products, and it's worked for them. And whether Lee's definition or explanation was the correct one, I don't know. It sounds plausible. But what he said is, first of all, you take an organ, let's say the kidney of a pig, of a healthy pig that's grown organically and fed organic food. So it's a healthy pig. Okay, so then from that, you then extract a portion of the cells. In other words, it's not the whole tissue, but a part of the cells, that especially of the fluids that have to do, which is called the cytosol of the cell, the fluids that have factors in there related to the DNA and the expression of DNA and so forth. And so you concentrate that into a product, and those products would be called renal or kidney PMG. It's a protomorphogen. Now, if the person takes that in their body, through the mouth, it goes into the system, then the body, it goes to the target organ. Now, there's been studies done, and I was trying to find it. I have it in my library, that in Europe, there were some studies done where they took these tissues and they put a radioactive tracer on it. So if you were given this kidney PMG, for example, after you've ingested it, it's gone through the digestive tract. With a radio tracer, they could trace it that it went to the kidneys. Okay, so they know that there's some relationship about the uniqueness of that differentiated cell, being a kidney cell, that makes taking these protomorphogens be directed to the kidneys. Now, here's what Lee's explanation was, and as I say, I don't know if that is correct, but all I know is that it works, and safely. So you take that, and he said that the autoimmune system, which is continually working around that organ because that organ is dumping toxic material as it's deteriorating and keeping it from repairing itself or regenerating itself, that this other material causes the autoimmune system to be engaged in dealing with that, and in the process of doing that, the cell then in the organ can trigger the repair process and the organ can repair itself. Now, that was his theory, or something to that effect. Now, whether that's accurate, as I say, I guess it stands to be proven. If you got people researching from the right direction, they'll someday probably find out, maybe, and maybe never. But anyhow, it worked. And so people, and I remember reading of a case where a medical doctor who was a cardiologist, his heart, or his wife's heart, had a massive infarction. And an infarction means that because the oxygen supply is cut off to a portion of the heart muscle dies. Now, in her case, it was a massive amount of tissue that died. And so she could barely function. Somebody got hold of that doctor and told him about the protomorphogen therapy. So he put her on it, and he had all the studies showing the damaged areas of her heart, and as she took these products over time, guess what happened? He noticed that the area of damage was shrinking up, which means that she was regenerating the cells to the heart. So regardless of the theory, what's going on, the fact is that it does work. I don't know if it triggers regenerative capabilities within the organ that haven't been triggered because the cells in the organ were so poisoned that this then is attracted to that organ, and then, because it is, these are cells that are healthy, and therefore they stimulate or provide the impetus for those cells to regrow or regenerate, or triggers the stem cells inherent to differentiate into kidney cells. I don't know. All I know is it's not dangerous, it works, and I think he made a tremendously powerful program. And the research proved to him and to the doctors who have done the research on top of it that it in fact does work. As I say, who knows? Now, there's a lot more we could get into about him, but to me, that's the big important thing. But now, he also found that you had to support the person's nutrition. You know, part of the reason the cells were unable to deal with the poisons in the first place is because they were nutritionally deficient. I've mentioned before that major players inside a cell has to be selenomethionine, selenium that's methionated, iodine, catalase, which is an enzyme that breaks down hydrogen peroxide, SOD, which is superoxide dismutase that breaks down superoxide radicals, and glutathione in the reduced form, which means that it has extra electrons. And glutathione is a big, big player. So those have to be present in the cell, but in order to do that, like catalase has to be manufactured in the body. I mean, you can take some in from outside, but it primarily is manufactured by the body if the body's working right. But it requires iron, and it requires copper, and it requires certain nutrients. Why? Because catalase has a hemoglobin core, which is like a red blood cell core, a hemoglobin molecule that requires iron. Now, copper acts as a cofactor or catalyst, as we mentioned earlier, and if both of those aren't present, you can't build catalase. If you can't build catalase, you cannot neutralize hydrogen peroxide in the body, and the immune system, especially the phagocytosis process, utilizes hydrogen peroxide to denature viruses and other types of toxins. But if there's no catalase present, or very little, the surrounding tissue of the body can be damaged. So catalase is extremely important, not only intracellularly, but intravascularly and in between. It has to be present in order to do that. So, but the body has to make it, and to make it, it has to have the right nutrients, and there's factors that it needs also to make the hemoglobin molecule. So when it's all said and done, it gets down to having the right nutrition and the right stimulus for the organ to repair itself or to regrow. Now, I feel that we can take it one step further. Now this, I'm just going to throw this in real fast because I ran across it. It says, fasting triggers stem cell regeneration of damaged old immune system. Fasting means to cut out taking in the junk in today's world and giving your body a rest, and it can do some things on its own. Anyhow, it was just an aside. I had run across that and I thought it was very interesting. You know, in the natural health field, a lot of times there are certain doctors that will have people fast for a while. Gives the body a break, the digestive system a break, saves energy that normally would be consumed to carry out that process, and allows the body to do some other things. Okay, so there is another factor that we need to talk about that I think adds to this, and I have done this, and I think it makes it even more potent because it adds an energy platform on top of the template that's provided by the protomorphogens. Remember, the form or template is proto, and morphogen or morphology or morphic all has to do with shape. So there is in homeopathic medicine a type of preparation called a sarcode. Okay, now a sarcode is made from healthy tissue or secretions, as opposed to a nosode, which we've mentioned before, is made from unhealthy, like degenerative tissue or whatever. And so, or viruses, funguses, chemical toxins of all kinds. I mean, there's a wide array of nosodes, which means not to please, or like nosocomial means sickness generated by a hospital. A nosode is a preparation made from some type of morbid tissue, as opposed to the sarcode, which is made from healthy tissue. Now, I'm just going to read you a little bit about sarcodes as far as definition. Homeopaths, of course, are mixed about what it all means. So that's an issue in itself. But here, the definition is, according to this writer, sarcodes are homeopathic drugs prepared. Now, we have to call homeopathic drugs because they are regulated by the FDA, and FDA calls homeopathics drugs. Now, usually people who use a lot of homeopathics refer to them as remedies. But in any case, the sarcodes are made from healthy animal tissues and secretions that in crude form contain biological molecules having specific physiological functions in the human organism, but the real therapeutic ones are higher potency, which means you dilute it past the fact that there's any molecules left. And they have a notable peculiarity. They always exist in molecular form in the organism and participate in molecular interactions. They become homeopathic only when they are not administered in molecular forms, but as potentized forms above 12C, which means it's diluted 1 to 99 12 times, which means, according to chemistry, there could not be one molecule left. At about 12 or 11.5 C, the last molecule would be gone in the dilution, and hence it's all pure informational imprint left in the carrier from whatever the original molecules were. It has exceeded what's called the Avogadro limit, which says that after that many dilutions there can't be any left, but they can be considered only as physiological products, not as homeopathic drugs, if they're below the Avogadro. So, when you dilute them to the right level, they become very powerful in terms of stimulating improvement. So if you took a sarcode of healthy liver, for example, it then should produce the informational charge to induce or have it correct anyhow. And that has what's occurred by taking sarcodes already, is that they in fact do cause a weak organ to become stronger, or in essence to repair itself. Now if you take, in my mind, the sarcode in conjunction with the protomorphogen, you have an extremely powerful method of inducing repair and regeneration in the body. Now that's my opinion. From many, many years of clinical experience, we've seen people that had some things happening that according to medicine, couldn't happen, but it has. We've had people being told things are genetic and hence not correctable, and we've seen people get well. So I just have seen a lot after almost 40 years of clinical experience in the natural health field and studying the human body and nutrition and studying regular medicine, studying other variants like Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, Tibetan medicine, ancient Hindu yoga medicine, osteopathic medicine, chiropractic medicine, and the whole concepts that all these different groups have. I can say I've seen all kinds of things happen that theoretically should not have happened, but did. The people got well. So I'm just throwing this out to you that you may want to look into some of this before you are in a hurry to get in line for an organ. You do have to get in line, of course, because the waiting lists are big and the pigs haven't been genetically modified to the point that you're going to be seeing a lot of xenotransplantation, which is what that's called when you translate tissue from a different species into yourself. In other words, if you take a pig or a cow or a sheep and take their organ and transplant it into a human, that's called xenotransplantation. So that has not developed yet, but there are researchers who are sinking huge amounts of money into making that happen because they think it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar market if they can get it done and get it approved. So I hope I've given you enough to stimulate your thinking a bit. And I'm going to throw one other thing in, because there is one other thing. I mentioned about the resonances of a cyclotron at certain key frequencies of the resonance of certain minerals, and it would then in turn activate growth factors that would cause tissue regrowth or repair. That's some of the stuff that's coming out of medicine. I've known for years that microcurrent, which is very, very low-level current, applied locally or through certain organs or tissues, can stimulate repair. Okay? It's actually regeneration, but you can't call it that. The man who discovered that in this country was a doctor who is a third-generation Oriental gentleman, but he was also highly trained in electronic engineering. He developed the concept of the pager and sold it to Motorola many years ago. Pagers, of course, many people don't know what they are anymore, but it was a big thing at one time. And so he made enough money that he could independently research, so he applied his electronics to acupuncture and health, and he developed a machine. And in the process of studying the effects of microcurrent, which is so light that you can hardly feel it, if at all, he noticed that it would tend to stimulate tissue regeneration. So when he developed this piece of equipment and was getting it approved to be sold on the market by the FDA, they saw that note in his material and said, "You cannot say that. Everybody knows you cannot regenerate tissue." And so he says, "Well, what about calling it enhanced tissue repair?" And they said, "Yeah, you can call it that." And so I have one of his machines, and I found that it in fact did have that capability. It would break down scar tissue and allow replacement with the normal cells by stimulating at key frequencies. And then of course there's one very specialized form of it called frequency specific, but there is a general frequency that seems to work in general, but there's some people now have put out some equipment where they tune it to a very precise frequency of different organ cells and tissues in the body and are getting some extremely good results with it. So we've helped remove scars from accidents. We've broken down keloids that were very painful that the person couldn't wear a shirt because the scar keloided and it was so painful they couldn't stand it to be touched. And I saw that in 1 week of daily treatments, a huge kidney surgery scar that had keloided. The person, as I say, could not stand it to be touched. At the end of 5 days in a row of stimulation with microcurrent, it shrunk down to almost nothing, lost all the sensitivities, and it leveled out like a regular scar instead of standing way up as a bad scar, a keloided scar. Okay, so I've given you enough to think about. We've overextended our time as usual. but I didn't want to go to a third session. I wanted to get as much of it as I could in 2 sessions. I hope I have given you enough information to stimulate your investigation, because it's all there. I pull most of my information. Occasionally I find old books that I can download from other countries that are no longer available here at all. And sometimes it's just research that's there. If you get on and know what you're looking for and know how to word the search engine, you will find all the stuff that I've talked about is there, because all these things the papers I was reading off of, they all came off the internet pretty much. I do have gotten a copy of the book on protomorphology, and as I say, I don't know, there was one company that was trying to reprint a lot of his stuff. I don't remember if they have the book available. You probably can find a used copy. You may have to pay a few bucks for it. Or else look to see if you can find that it could be downloaded someplace. But it may be out of the country that it's available. At any rate, it was nice to be with you again. I hope, as I say, that I stimulated your thinking. And until our next encounter, be healthy. Go to our website, mindyourhealthcast.com, and look at some of the newer stuff I'm going to be putting more on. I've found that I'm about 6 hours a day short and about 3 days a week short. But as much as I can find the time, I'm constantly getting material together that I think is worthwhile for people's health. Otherwise, until the next broadcast, be healthy.